The smoke rising from the eastern pastures reached Marin's cottage long before the screams did. She stood at her workbench, meticulously grinding dried willow bark into a fine powder, when the acrid, unfamiliar smell filled her lungs and stung her nose. Peering through the small window, she watched as villagers flooded the streets, running frantically toward the town square. Their faces were twisted with a terror she recognized all too well. It was a look she had seen 3 times in as many weeks. The dragon had come again. Marin wiped the white powder from her hands onto her worn apron and stepped outside, her heart heavy in her chest. The village of Thornwick was once a peaceful place, nestled at the foot of the Whitepeak mountains. Now it was a place of fear. Each time the great beast descended from the peaks like a storm given wings, leaving a trail of destruction and sorrow in its wake. The village elders, desperate and angry, demanded that hunters track it down and end its reign of terror. The priests, in their turn, called for fervent prayers and even sacrifices, hoping to appease whatever god they had angered. But Marin, the village healer, had noticed something the others hadn't. She had seen details missed by eyes clouded with panic and grief. The dragon, she realized, was getting weaker. After the first attack, she had secretly studied the scorch patterns left on the fields and barns. They were vast and all-consuming, but with each subsequent visit, the burns grew smaller, less precise, as if the fire within the beast was sputtering. Just 2 days ago, while gathering herbs by the river, she had found something extraordinary. A single dragon scale, as large as her hand, lay half buried in the mud. It was a beautiful thing, the color of a midnight sky shot through with streaks of silver. But beneath the shimmering surface, she saw something disturbing. Dark, thread-like veins spread through the scale, like poison coursing through blood. The realization struck her with the force of a physical blow. The dragon wasn't attacking out of malice. It was desperate. It was lashing out in pain. That evening, as the village gathered in the square to mourn their latest losses and curse the beast in the mountains, Marin made a decision. She slipped back to her cottage and began to pack a leather satchel. She filled it not with weapons, but with the tools of her trade. Bandages spun from strong, delicate spider silk, jars of salves infused with healing moonflower and potent saint's root, surgical needles and thread, blessed by her grandmother, who had been the village healer before her and had taught her everything she knew. She didn't tell a soul where she was going. They would have called her mad, tried to stop her, and perhaps, she thought, they would have been right. The climb was grueling, taking most of the night. Marin followed the grim trail left by the dragon, a path of broken trees and deeply scarred earth leading up the treacherous mountainside. Her small lantern cast long, dancing shadows on the jagged rocks, making the familiar landscape seem alien and threatening. The air grew thin and cold, and her breath formed white clouds that dissolved into the oppressive darkness. More than once, doubt crept into her mind. The fear was a cold knot in her stomach, but something deeper, an intuition that had guided her through countless illnesses and injuries, pulled her forward. It was a feeling she had learned to trust above all else. She found the cave just as the first hints of dawn were painting the eastern sky. The entrance was a gaping wound in the mountain's face, a dark maw wide enough to swallow a house. A wave of heat radiated from within, carrying the smell of sulfur and something else, the unmistakable, sickly sweet scent of rot and sickness. Marin's hands trembled as she set down her lantern at the entrance, took a deep breath, and stepped inside. The dragon lay in the cavern's immense depths. It was coiled around itself like a dying star, its magnificent form barely visible in the gloom. Even in this weakened state, it was the most awe-inspiring creature Marin had ever seen. Scales the color of midnight covered its massive body, and wings that could blot out the sun lay folded and limp against its sides. But as her eyes adjusted, she saw the damage. The beautiful scales were cracked and weeping a foul-smelling fluid. One of its great wings was bent at an unnatural, painful angle, and there, along its flank, she saw the source of its agony. A festering gash, deep and wide, that spoke of sharpened spears and the hatred of men. It was infected, angry, and slowly killing the creature. The dragon's eye, larger than her head, snapped open. It was the color of molten gold, ancient and filled with a weary wisdom. It fixed on her with an intensity that should have sent her running for her life. The sheer power radiating from it was overwhelming. But instead of fleeing, Marin slowly, deliberately knelt down. She opened her satchel, revealing her supplies. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't make any sudden movements. In the vast, silent cavern, with the dying beast's gaze upon her, she whispered into the space between them. "I'm not here to hurt you. I'm here to help," she said, her voice small but steady. "If you'll let me." The golden eye watched her, unblinking. For a long moment, the only sound was the dragon's ragged breathing, and the frantic beating of Marin's own heart. Then, slowly, infinitesimally, the great head lowered just a fraction, a silent consent. With trembling but determined hands, Marin began her work. She first approached the massive wound on its flank. The stench was almost unbearable, but she forced herself to focus, just as she would with any patient. She cleaned the gash with cloths soaked in a strong antiseptic solution she'd prepared, her small hands moving deftly against the backdrop of colossal, cracked scales. The dragon flinched, a low rumble echoing from its chest, but it remained still. It seemed to understand as she worked. She spoke to it in a low, soothing voice, telling it about the herbs she was using, about her grandmother, about the simple life in the village below. She wasn't sure if the creature understood her words, but the cadence of her voice seemed to calm it. She applied a thick layer of her most powerful healing salve, the one made with moonflower and saint's root, feeling the heat of the infection through her fingertips. Next, she turned her attention to the broken wing. It was a far more difficult task. The bone was massive, the displacement severe. She knew she couldn't set it alone, not in the traditional sense, but she could support it, ease the pain. Using rolls of her strongest spider silk bandages and several sturdy branches she degathered on her way up, she fashioned a massive splint. She wrapped the wing carefully, securing it against the dragon's body to immobilize it. The entire process took hours. The sun was high in the sky by the time she was finished, its light filtering into the cave entrance, exhausted. Maren sat back on her heels. The dragon's breathing was already easier, less ragged. The golden eye was closed now, but she knew it was not asleep. It was resting. She stayed with it for 3 days, cleaning the wound daily, changing the dressings, and replenishing its water from a small underground spring she found deeper in the cave. She shared her own meager rations of bread and cheese, feeling a strange sense of companionship with the silent, wounded giant. On the 3rd morning, she awoke to find the dragon stirring. It pushed itself up, its movements slow but stronger than before. It stretched its splinted wing, testing it, and then turned its great head toward her. The golden eye held a new light, not just wariness, but something akin to gratitude. It nudged her gently with its snout, a gesture so delicate it barely rustled her clothes. Then, with a newfound strength, it limped toward the cave entrance. It paused there, turning back to look at her one last time before disappearing into the bright mountain sunlight. Maren returned to Thornwick, a different person. The villagers, who had feared her lost to the mountains, were overjoyed to see her. They never knew what she had done. The dragon attack stopped. The fear that had gripped the village slowly receded, replaced by the familiar rhythms of daily life. Sometimes Moran would look up at the Frostpeak Mountains, and she would think of the magnificent creature she had healed. She knew the world was full of misunderstandings, of fear born from ignorance, and she knew that sometimes the greatest courage wasn't in fighting the monster, but in daring to understand its pain. The shadow of the mountain no longer seemed threatening, but protective, and Maren, the village healer, kept its secret safe in her heart. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell for more tales from our channel. We'll see you in the next one. The dragon watched her with that unblinking golden eye as Maren approached, her hands steady despite her racing heart. She'd treated wolf bites and bear maulings, but nothing had prepared her for the sheer scale of the wound before her. The gash ran the length of its massive body, festering with a dark magic that resisted all her usual remedies. She took a deep breath, trying to project a calm she didn't feel. "This will hurt," she murmured, unsure if the creature even understood human speech. "But I promise I'm trying to help." She knelt beside the enormous beast and began cleaning the wound with blessed water. The dragon's muscles tensed instantly, a low rumble vibrating through the stone beneath her knees, but to her astonishment, it didn't move, it didn't strike out. As she worked, Maren started to talk. She told it about her small village Thornwick. She spoke of her grandmother's teachings, the ancient art of healing passed down through generations. She described the herbs she was using, their properties, and the songs her grandmother sang over them to enhance their power. Slowly, impossibly, she felt the dragon begin to relax under her touch. The tension in its body eased, and the rumbling subsided into a soft, almost purring vibration. Over the following days, a new rhythm took hold of Marin's life. She returned to the cave each dawn, the climb up the treacherous mountain path becoming second nature. With each visit, she brought stronger medicines, poultices mixed with rare glowing moss, and bits of food she could barely afford to spare from her own meager stores. The dragon never harmed her, never even growled in her presence. Instead, it seemed to listen intently whenever she spoke, tilting its great horned head as if it were truly considering her words, a silent confidant to her daily ramblings. On the seventh day, a breakthrough. As she began to change the bandages, which were now just clean strips of cloth she'd brought from her own home, the dragon did something completely unexpected. It shifted its massive body, carefully moving its wing to give her better, easier access to the wound. Marin's breath caught in her throat. A wave of awe washed over her. It understood it wasn't just tolerating her presence. It was actively helping her. "Who hurt you?" she asked softly, her voice barely a whisper. She began stitching the torn scales back together with enchanted thread that shimmered with a faint silver light. The dragon's golden eye dimmed, and for a fleeting moment, Marin saw something in that ancient gaze that went far beyond animal instinct. It was a flicker of something deeply, painfully human, betrayal, a profound loneliness that felt like it spanned decades, if not centuries. Hesitantly, she reached out her hand and placed her palm flat against its snout. The scales were surprisingly warm and smooth as a river stone polished by an eternity of flowing water. The dragon released a long, slow breath, a plume of warm air ghosting across her arm. In that moment, something unspoken passed between them. It felt like recognition, a shared understanding. Or perhaps it was the fragile beginning of trust. That evening, as she packed her satchel to leave, the dragon lifted its head and made a sound unlike any she had ever heard before. It wasn't the fearsome roar she had imagined. It was something gentler, a series of soft, melodic clicks and rumbles. It almost sounded like a name. Ashrin Marin whispered, testing the word on her tongue. It felt right. The dragon's eye immediately brightened. "Is that who you are?" The great head dipped in a single, deliberate nod. Marin felt tears welling in her eyes, blurring the sight of the magnificent creature before her. She smiled through them. "I'm Marin, and I'm going to heal you, Ashrin. I promise." 3 weeks later, Ashrin could fly again. Marin stood at the entrance of the cave, her heart swelling as she watched him circle the snow-capped peaks. His wing, once a mangled mess, was now whole and strong, catching the wind with powerful, confident strokes. A strange mix of joy and sadness warred in her chest. He was strong now, he was free, he could leave this place, find somewhere safe, far away from the hunters and the king's men who still sought his head. But he didn't leave. Each evening, as the sun dipped below the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, he returned to the cave. And each dawn, Maren made the climb, no longer just a healer visiting her patient, but a friend visiting a friend. Their bond had deepened into something profound, something she couldn't quite name. Sometimes she'd wake from vivid dreams of flying, the wind rushing past her face, the world a beautiful tapestry below. Other times she'd feel a phantom ache in her side, a ghost of the pain where Ashran's wound had been. They were connected now to souls intertwined in ways that defied all logic and explanation. Then the messengers came. They rode into Thornwick on sweat-flecked horses, their banners bearing the crest of Blackmere. The message from King Roderick was blunt and cruel. He coveted Thornwick as fertile lands, and had given them 1 week to surrender their homes and their livelihoods. The village council was thrown into chaos. They had no army, no real defenses to speak of. Fear, thick and suffocating, gripped everyone as they debated their impossible choice. Submit to a tyrant and become serfs, or fight back and face certain slaughter. Maren told Ashran everything that night, her voice breaking as she sat beside him in the quiet of the cave. "I don't know what to do," she confessed, her tears falling onto his warm scales. "These are my people. This is my home, but we're not warriors. We can't win this." The dragon rumbled, a deep and resonant sound that vibrated through her entire body. Then he did something that changed everything. He lowered his massive head and gently pressed his forehead to hers. Suddenly, her mind was flooded. It wasn't words. Not exactly, but images, feelings, pure intentions. She felt his fierce protectiveness, his unwavering loyalty, and she felt a white-hot rage at the very thought of anyone harming her or her people. He would not let it happen. When Blackmere's army arrived 6 days later, marching in disciplined, arrogant lines, they found something waiting for them that was not in their battle plans. A dragon stood between them and the village of Thornwick, and this time he wasn't wounded or desperate. He was defending his home. The battle was brief and terrifyingly decisive. Ashran's roar shook the mountains to their very foundations, a sound of pure elemental fury. His fire, a torrent of liquid gold, sent the soldiers fleeing in panic, their perfect formations breaking into a mad scramble for survival. But in the chaos, a small child, a girl from the village, had wandered too close to the fighting. Moran saw a burning wooden beam from a shattered siege engine toppling directly towards her. She didn't think, she just ran, throwing herself between the girl and the falling debris. Pain, white-hot and blinding, exploded across her back. She heard Ashran's anguished roar, a sound of pure terror that echoed her own agony through their bond. Then darkness claimed her. She woke 3 days later in her own bed, the scent of healing herbs filling the air. Her injuries were bandaged, her back aching with a dull, throbbing pain. Through her window, she saw him. Ashran was coiled protectively around her small cottage, a scaly, formidable guardian, refusing to leave her side. She could feel him through their connection, a pulsing wave of his fear, his overwhelming relief, and his desperate, all-consuming need to keep her safe. And tangled within it all was something else. Something warm and powerful and new, that felt dangerously, wonderfully close to love.